the Army values, the Warrior ethos, coaching, and therapy. This is Warrior Leadership. This is Warrior Leadership. All right, this is JJ Hardy, the coach.
And this is DB, the therapist.
DB, the therapist. My man, how you doing today?
Hey, man, I'm doing good, man. Just weathering the storms of life, man. Weathering the storms of life.
There are plenty of them, but you know what? We're warriors, so we'll get through any storm that comes our way. We just got to find the right path.
That's
all right. So today on Warrior Leadership, we're going to talk about ego versus super ego. And from a leadership standpoint, ego is a very, very dangerous thing. But I'm going to go ahead and give it over to the therapist first, and we're going to talk about what those things are, and then we're going to make a discussion happen. So go ahead, DB.
Okay, so ego. So the first thing to come to mind, for most people, let's just get, I think we hear a lot, we hear ego tripping, right? And what does that mean? What does ego tripping mean? Like, we hear that so much. And then you also, back in the day, for some of those folks who study Sigmund Freud, you learned about the id, ego, and the super ego. But the ego is the body and the mind, and the self are your false self, right? I think that's very powerful. And so when you think about this idea of ego tripping, it also makes me think about identity, right? And so when I think about ego, I'm thinking of someone acting out of character and out of their identity because they don't really know who they are for whatever reason. And so when I think of ego tripping and someone really not having a secure sense of self, then they're likely to give in to impulsive desire. So that's what I think about quite often when I think of the word ego.
Interesting. And ego, that makes so much sense, because when I said it's dangerous in leadership, because if you are managing a team of people and you have a big ego, whether it's because you're insecure or if it's because you just don't want to be wrong or whatever the case may be, then you will always put yourself before everyone else. And one of the key principles of leadership is to put the welfare of your subordinates and everybody else in the workplace before your own, because you're in a support role. So that is such a dangerous thing to have. So what is super ego?
All right. So super ego is the seat of wisdom. And we can also think of, we should also look at the super ego as the soul, right? Okay. Which is and if we think about this idea of ego and super ego, they're two polar opposites. And you have the mind and the body, if you will, over here with the ego. And then over here, you have the soul, which is, comes sometimes in a lot of ways, man, they kind of go contrary to each other. And I think that's the challenge, man, in life. And that's where, like, that ego sits right in the middle. And it's like, hey, you want to go over here and do this immediate thing that's all about self-gratification and about me, and not the team. And I think that's where, as we go into this topic of social intelligence and connectivity to other people, and really thinking about empathy and some of those other pillars that we talked about as far as EQ, I think it's so important to really develop that super wisdom, which kind of grounds our choices, because it's based on our belief systems. A lot of times, our souls, if you will, are anchored by our religious beliefs, maybe even other philosophies or different things like that we may have about, morality and how we treat other human beings, how we treat the earth around us, how we treat animals. Like, all those things kind of play into this idea of super ego and this sort of greater sense of responsibility to something greater than the self, right? So that's what I think about when I think of super ego.
So servant leadership really lies in that super ego. And I love that, because, understanding the difference and why you should be leaning more towards the super ego and really being in touch. I mean, we just got done doing an entire series on emotional intelligence, and you really have to be emotionally aware of who you are, and also what feelings you're putting out in order to, and how to deal with those feelings in order to get rid of that ego and develop that, super ego. Because showing that to other people and having that way about yourself is not the easiest of the two.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to understand that it takes some work to get there. I would say that most people, when they are under the age of 18, they are not living life with their super ego.
Yes.
They're just not. So
Right.
when they get older, the reason that old people are so wise is because, I don't know another way to say this, but I'm going to say they just don't give a damn anymore. And so they just, they know that people are more important than all the other crap that's going on in the world. And so they treat people better than they would have when they were a younger individual. Right. And so the wise people have that super ego for sure.
well, and does that mean we're getting old? Because apparently, we're getting into that space.
Whoa. Calm down.
No. Yeah, I'm just, it's just a question. I mean, it's interesting too, Coach. I think you look at, you think about this idea of, left brain, right brain. And on the left side of the brain, we have our IQ. And on the right side is the EQ, right? We talk about that a lot, right? Left brain, right brain. What's interesting is that both of those sort of, you would think that, and I think this is like conventional wisdom, or the world really kind of looks at IQ as if it's outside of the realm of ego. Well, your ego, you could still be overly intelligent and intellectualized and still, sort of miss a point that is rooted in, that wisdom or that super ego, which is what we would call the SQ, which is kind of like the bridge that brings together IQ and EQ, right? So the point is I think it's not that someone who lacks emotional intelligence will necessarily ego trip. Someone who is extremely intelligent can also technically ego trip. And so I think that's a very important point to make, because I think we make an assumption that it's just someone who's overly emotive. But it's this like this concept that I learned in a treatment called DBT, and the concept is called wise mind. And the whole idea is that you have logic on one side and then you have emotion on the other, and it really symbolizes this whole idea of left brain, right brain. But right in the middle of that Venn diagram is where we're most effective as human beings. And I think that's the super ego. That's all of the wisdom, our experiences from our past, the wisdom of our grandmothers, our mothers, our fathers, people who we were raised by, our spiritual beliefs. So all that stuff, all of that knowledge base and that wisdom is right there in the center. And sometimes we might err to either side. And I think when you have trauma and when you have unresolved unforgiveness towards other people, it starts to push you either direction. And so wisdom helps you move back to the center. And I think that's where therapy and coaching really comes in as bridges to really help people stay centered and stay grounded and not ego trip. Right?
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point you make. You could be an extremely intelligent person and still have a big ego. It's kind of rooted in, yeah, I like that. We talk about the icebergs a lot, all those underlying conditions that make a person's core belief system. And if that core belief system is that when you were younger you were always told that you were wrong, well, maybe now you always feel like you have to be right. And if that's really the reason behind the way you ego trip, then you might need some work to be done, because you have to address those core beliefs. And without addressing those core beliefs, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to stop putting yourself and all of your opinions first.
Oh yeah, that's good. And you know, the interesting thing about this whole intersection between coaching and therapy, when we have an individual who's struggling with core beliefs and unresolved issues, a lot of times those are stuck points. And I think I know in therapy, we're able to uncover what those actual stuck points are. And then when we can rewrite the narrative, help people rewrite their narrative, then they're in a better position and more open-minded to receive coaching, right? Because if they have these preconceived notions about power and control and different things like that that just come up in general, you know, they're going to be resistant to coaching, right? They can come to you for coaching, but they're going to be resistant. And you're going to be like, hey, I'm giving you the playbook. I'm telling you, like, you know, kind of like Phil Jackson. I'm teaching you the triangle offense. I know it works, and you're not executing properly. And so as a coach, I can only imagine like how frustrating that is if you're working with someone that's ego tripping, man, and that has unresolved issues that they're not dealing with.
Well, it's frustrating, but you have to be understanding, because
Sure.
you know there are a lot of factors that play into something like that. A lot of the people I deal with are people who are in senior management positions. I would like to deal with some of those people that are in those junior management positions, but it seems like I get those people that are in senior ones, and then also business owners. And when you have all of this responsibility, trust can play into that too, because if you know that you can get stuff accomplished, and you've always been known for getting stuff accomplished, relinquishing a little bit of that trust over to somebody else, it's more than ego. It's really, it comes off as ego, but you have to understand that, you know, they raised this baby themselves. They nurtured this baby all throughout this time. And now they have to trust this type of responsibility to somebody else. Woo.
Ooh, you use the T word.
Well,
that's a big word now.
It is, but
yes,
you know, it's not easy to, especially if that person isn't somebody that you've known for a long time, to just immediately give some of that responsibility away, to delegate. To delegate is one of the hardest things for a leader to learn. And it's not because they want to get over involved. That's not it at all. It's just because they're afraid of, it's the fear of failure. They don't want those things that they're involved with to go wrong, because they know at the end of the day, they're responsible for the success and the failure of everything within their sphere of influence. So trusting some of that to somebody else means that it might not go the way that it has been going. And that's just such an interesting thing. There are just so many things that play into ego.
Yes. You know, and coach, you went under the iceberg there, man. And you remember a while back, I mean, this was a couple months back, I remember we had that same conversation when we were talking about my therapy practice, and just me moving into this new season of hiring a team, hiring clinicians. And you know, we processed just in our own in the coaching session I had with you about, you know, the need to trust and the need to also recognize that it's not going to be exactly how I would do it, and being okay with that, being okay with allowing people to fail forward, being allowing showing grace, showing that people are teachable. I remember I was listening to I forget the 75 hard guy, his name, but he talked about a time where he allowed one of his employees to basically make a $5,000 mistake, and he didn't fire him. And you know, when he didn't fire them, I mean, in your ego, I could see where your ego would cause you to maybe you know, fire someone immediately like that, and not be that servant leader and not be there to teach. But to like hold back and teach someone in that moment, man. It has to, for that person, for both people, it has to build a lot of trust, like you just said, and confidence in each other. And I just think that that's a good direction to start going in terms of how you went under the iceberg and you talked about trust. Because remember, this whole series now is about just social intelligence and connection. And so we can reach really high levels in life and get so far ahead of the crowd to where we look around and we're like, well, where's my team? And so then you realize you got to start slowing down and bringing people along. And that part requires trust, and it requires you to examine relationships that you've had that you still may have some unresolved trust issues. Because as human beings, I mean, we harbor bitterness, unforgiveness, and all those things in our heart. And so, it's interesting because the soul is actually the seat of emotions. And so when you think about it, you think about these emotions just being held right there and not utilizing that wisdom that says that in life, sometimes we get hurt by people, but that doesn't mean we hold on to that hurt, that we learn how to forgive and we learn how to move on past it. Like, I am on a crusade against this whole universal thought of forgive, but don't forget. You know what? We also need to forget, because when we're remembering, all we're doing is holding that thought in there, and then the emotion is coming back up, and we're harboring those feelings because we believe by harboring the feelings, we're going to protect ourselves against harm. And so I think wisdom would show us that we're not really protecting ourselves. We're actually just using a primitive defense mechanism to try to keep ourselves safe, and we're not really safe by that. It's actually keeping us prisoner and not allowing us to build other relationships.
Wow. Yeah, anything, it seems, why is it, and maybe you can answer this, but it seems like all of the immediate actions that are taken, the easiest ones, always end up being the negative ones. A negative thought that turns into anger, a negative emotion about somebody that turns into antitrust. So many of those immediate emotions that we have to mitigate in our mind before we act. Looks like somebody said something here. Delegation is the hardest thing for a leader to learn because they are afraid to fail. Trust may be the absolutely. Just like what we've been saying. Delegation is the hardest thing for a leader to learn because they are afraid to fail. And trust may be the real issue.
That was a bot.
You thought it was a bot?
No, I'm just joking. That was me that posted that.
Oh, was it?
Yes.
Well, guess what? You're wise, sir. But it is. Trust is an underlying issue, and sometimes it's a trust in ourselves, to be quite honest with you. Because if you can't trust that the decisions that you make, if it's outside of what you're used to, could have a positive consequence at the end of it, then delegation, or spilling out your emotions to another human being, or whatever type of connection you have to make with somebody else, it's going to be a lot harder.
Yes.
And it's such a big deal. I mean, people don't understand how hard it is to trust. It's not like, hey, dummy, go over there and just delegate. No, you got to figure out why they're not willing to do it and help them address it, because otherwise they're going to end up micromanaging after they delegate.
That's right. And what do people hate more than anything than someone that's micromanaging them?
Oh, yes. Micromanaging is the worst. But people want to do the work and know that they're being trusted to make mistakes or do the right thing one way or the other. Yes. And they don't want somebody standing over their shoulder and watching them. And by the way, I have to point out to everybody who's listening here, when somebody is watching over my shoulder when I'm working, I am 10 times more likely to make a mistake. Leave me the heck alone and let me do what you asked me to do. Trust me.
Yes. You know, that's so important because you can draw parallels with that relationship dynamic between an employer and an employee, or a leader and a follower. You can connect that dot to one's relationship with their parents. And part of the thing that I tell parents in my therapy practice is, we have to allow our kids to fail forward. I mean, we give at a certain point in parenting, man, we give the instruction, and we have to act as advisors even to our children. And a lot of times it's hard for parents to make that shift as leaders. Like, they're always wanting to be nurturers still, like the child is a toddler. But at a certain point, man, especially in teenage years, as they're getting ready to make this transition into the real world, so to speak, as a leader and as a parent, you have to be able to let go of the reins and allow them to make decisions based on the wisdom or superego that you've poured into these kids, and you put in all this knowledge and information. Now let them go out there and build that confidence. And that confidence is so important, because for that individual, it's building their self-worth, but it's also building trust, like you just said, which is so important. And I think so many times you can that translate to the work world as well. Like, if you go to work and you haven't got that validation from your parents growing up, or from anybody growing up, you might see that boss as that father figure or as that mother figure. And I think sometimes our leaders, they take that role lightly. They don't realize the weight that their role and their position plays in people's lives. I mean, we spend 40 plus hours a week at work, doing a good job, to meet the needs of the company and to accomplish the mission. But I think there's also, so a lot of people are looking for the validation, which is also very important. And so you see it over and over again, man, where you do these employee evaluations, and over again, most companies score low on this idea of wanting to be recognized, feeling psychologically safe to bring up things. Like, those are things that are coming up over and over again. And as leaders, you have to be responsive to that. And are you comfortable with coming down and getting down in the foxhole with your people?
Yes. Yeah, that's why I did partner with a company called Coefficient, and I do provide a survey to business owners when I go into a company to help them out, and it identifies those things very well. But let's go ahead and do the difficult thing before we run out of time here, and address the poor mental health of the workplace, because I feel like that this is something that really can make or break the workplace mental health. Because if you don't trust your down trace employees, they're not going to be happy in their role. And there are tons of people and tons of opportunities for those people out there, and sometimes they will leave the workplace. But if you can't put your ego aside and delegate and trust and not micromanage and let people just grow in their own right and help them develop as an employee and a manager, if that's what they are below you, then ultimately, if they look up to you, they are going to feel like less of a person. And what's even worse than that is if they don't feel like they can go out there and start looking for another job because they just need the financial security of the position that they're currently working in, then what's going to happen is their mental health is going to get worse and worse. Their leadership style is going to become worse and worse. The toxicity of the workplace is going to get worse and worse. And as a result of that, not just that one manager that you're not willing to delegate to, but everybody that works for that manager is also going to suffer as a result of that. And when we're talking about 16% of the entire workforce has issues with opioid and alcohol abuse, then you have to really work on this, is if this is something that you have a problem with. And, you know, then another 10% of that 16%, you know, they're committing suicide, especially in the construction trades. Again, there are more than just the ego issue that causes that. But just think about those people that don't feel like they can leave their job, and they're stuck, because if they go and apply for another job and their current employer finds out that they're applying for another job and they get fired, then their family is not going to be supported. That's such a worry for a lot of people. And if they are not feeling supported in their job already, which, by the way, is giving them that negative emotion already, then it's just a spiral from there. So please don't do this to your people. You having power over someone else is not going to help them perform. You using your ego and your position of responsibility as a way to demand people to do the job the way you want them to do it is not going to help them get better, and it's not going to help the workplace mental health issues that are going on right now. You need to be a part of the solution, not part of the problem. Wow. Okay, I wanted to say that. My rant is over. Feel free to address that however you want to do it.
No, you know what? That is so good, man. You said a lot. And, you know, I think it's interesting that both of us are warriors, and we're teaching warrior leadership. And it's amazing how yet, you know, society might think of a warrior as a certain way. It's powerful for us to be addressing this from the mental health standpoint, because I think it's an even deeper discussion about how do we get athletes, warriors, businessmen, whomever, businesswoman, whoever, to perform at the highest level, right? And to be most efficient. That's really what this conversation is. It's a deeper conversation about that maximum productivity. And obviously there is, you know, these newer philosophies that are around, and different leadership styles that kind of go against the servant leadership model. But the servant leadership model is tried and true. In my opinion, it's the gold standard. And I think if you want to think about what kind of leadership style lends best to sort of a familial framework, which I think is very important when you talk about working with people. I know, you know, I love the series Fast and the Furious, where Dom always talks about a family. And although they're, you know, not necessarily doing legal activity, the idea the idea that they are family, I think, is so important, man. I mean, when you think about the military, right? The number one thing that we miss from being in the military is the camaraderie. And that camaraderie has to do with family. And some of our ideas of family have been so warped because of the high divorce rates in families, all of the issues that come along with the psychosocial issues that come along with divorce, separation. There are some people who are still in a relationship, but very much have already checked out. And so those kids in that family system are still dealing with the same psychosocial issues. And so as a society, we have generations and generations of people that have grown up in horrible family systems. And then they come into these work systems, and those same people that have been treated the same way within their own family system, they're bringing that leadership style, that toxicity into the work environment. And yes, they may be productive and meeting the standard, but at what cost, right? When you have over 40,000 people a year dying by suicide, and then we're not even counting the number of people who attempt, right? And that's only one statistic that we're looking at. We're not looking at all the other negative health effects of toxic stress, being in these environments. Like, you know, this conversation is so, you know, deep and profound. Like, you know, we're trying to pack it in 30 minutes, But to be honest with you, the majority of people that I work with, they are not satisfied with where their life is. And I think that's what, when you think about therapy, when you think about coaching, it really presents an opportunity to give people hope. I mean, even when we get in spaces with people, as the counselor, as the coach, we represent that hope for those people, because we've taken the time out of our lives to literally dedicate our life's work to, for this very reason, to help people navigate through the muddy waters, right? We decided that we're going to go back and get those people who feel like they're in quicksand and help pull them out and help them figure out how to navigate this so-called rat race and be able to get through it and excel. You know, one of the most beautiful things in the world, man, is to be working with someone and watch a rose grow from a concrete. That means, you know, you watch them come from this place where you think that, you know, it's all over for them. And you think that as well when they come in and could sort of present their case, if you will. And you're like, man, he's right. She's right. That is a very difficult situation to come back from. But when you just hold space for people and you build connections with them, man, it's so powerful how, you know, just talking to someone and them having empathy and warm regard for you, how that helps move you to this next place in your life, past all of the storms that you might be going through. And so, you know, this idea of, you know, connection and this social intelligence, man, this is so important. It's really an important topic, and I'm excited to just continue to talk about it and continue to you know, open up this discussion, man.
Me too. It really is an epidemic, the workplace mental health, and you don't understand how bad it is until you start going over the statistics. And when you look at the average workplace and you see people smiling and joking around with each other and having a good time, and you can look at 10 people and know that likely 2 or 3 of those people are struggling with something, whether it's at work or at home, that they're not talking about it. There's so much there. So I just want to put a plug in for us real quick before I make some final comments here. But we're doing some big things. We're getting ready in the warrior leadership realm. We're going to be creating communities, and we're going to be doing some things as a team here that are going to change the landscape of how these issues are addressed in the workplace. And I'm not going to go into any detail because I'm going to leave all of y'all in suspense. But guess what? If you watch this 2 or 3 months from when this was posted on here, you probably already know what they are. So it just all depends on when you watch this. No, but we're excited, and you know, just stay up to date. Keep watching these when you can, and ask us questions and all those fun stuff. Please participate in these conversations if you tune in. I don't even think I saw one person tune in on Instagram or any of our other platforms while we were live streaming today, but that's okay. But if you do, when you see this, like it, subscribe to it, share it, repost it, but most importantly, leave a comment so we can keep the conversation going, because we all want to provide this support together, and the community starts here. So let's go ahead and address these issues, because more people than just you are experiencing what you're experiencing, and so it needs to be brought out into the open. You got any closing comments, DB?
No, sir, that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you all for watching this, when you watch this or listen to it, and have a great and blessed day.